Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Gretchen and today I'm back with another reading recap. I think it's been a little over a week since I've last touched base with you guys and there is a lot going on. So let's go ahead and start with the books that I have finished recently. So the first couple that I'll talk about are carryovers, so ones that I talked about in my last recap. And the first one that I finished was one of the ones I was reading for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction, and that is A Flat Place by Noreen Masud. And this is a book that I will of course be doing a full-length review for, but I will say I rather enjoyed my time with this book, and I can definitely see why it was recognized by the Women's Prize for Nonfiction. So more to come with this one. And the next carryover book that I finished was The Cemetery of Untold Stories by Julia Alvarez. So the plot of this book is we have our main character, and she is an author that inherits a small plot of land, and she decides what she is going to do with that land is build a cemetery for people, including herself, to bury their untold or their unfinished stories. And that premise immediately intrigued me. I thought that it was unique and something that could really turn into a compelling and engaging and interesting story. But sadly, I was a little disappointed by this book. And when I say that I was disappointed in it, it's not that I found the book to be bad. This was a case of my expectations going into the book about what it was going to deliver and it not doing that. So I read that synopsis, and the way that I perceived it was we were going to hear about multiple people, lots of people coming to this cemetery, and we would hear little snippets or fragments of their stories. So we would get just enough of their story to learn about it, but also use our own imaginations to take off and figure out or determine what the ending of that story could possibly be. And that really wasn't what the book delivered. What it did was take two primary stories and give us a really in-depth discussion about each of those two stories. And although those two stories that were presented were good, I was just expecting something completely different. So anytime I read a synopsis and I have something in my mind about what the book is going to deliver, even if the book that I read is amazing, if it still doesn't meet my expectations, I'm disappointed. And it's not a criticism of the book. Sometimes it truly is a criticism of the synopsis and how books are marketed, or it could just be my interpretation. I could have completely misinterpreted what the synopsis was saying, and that could very well be the case with this, but the book at the end of the day didn't provide what I was expecting it to deliver, so it did end up leaving me a little disappointed. However, I will say the book was a good read, and I loved that she had a little bit of magical realism in there. This was my first Julia Alvarez, and she has a pretty solid backlist from what I understand, and her writing was very lyrical and pretty, and I definitely think that she is an author that I could pick up some of her backlist books with and hopefully enjoy them a little more than my enjoyment level for this book. Now, the other book that I read was one that I was reading for a reading challenge. So there is a Storygraph reading challenge hosted by Simon and Louise Savage, and this month's prompt was to read a book that is authored by someone that shares the same first name as you. And the book that I chose was Because Internet by Gretchen McCulloch. And this book was setting out to understand the rules of language as it relates to online communication. And the author definitely delivered on that promise. So basically this was talking about how the internet has changed our language, how we talk, how we communicate, and it was fun and it was informative and it left me wanting more in parts as well. I think that my enjoyment level of this book was slightly reduced because the author throughout the entirety of the book kept kind of alluding to different things that would come later in the book. So she would be talking about a subject and really getting deep, and I was really interested in what she was talking about. And then instead of exploring that thought further in the moment, she would say, oh, well, we'll get to that in another chapter. And then ultimately, when we got to the other chapter, it didn't end up tying back to what she was originally talking about, and it just felt like there were a lot of unfinished thoughts throughout the book. And maybe perhaps they weren't unfinished, but I didn't know exactly where to jump ahead to in the book to read in the moment about closing the point that she was trying to make. And for example, I think that I was most annoyed when she was talking about memes. So she mentioned memes earlier on in the book, and she was really getting into something that was really engaging, and I was really interested in learning. And then she kind of just stopped and is like, well, we'll talk more about this later. And then, like I said, by the time we got to the book or the chapter related to memes later, I wasn't as engaged in the previous point that she was trying to make, and it never really felt like she pulled me back to that point she was trying to make earlier in the book. So that would be my only criticism of the book, but yeah, I did enjoy it overall. And I will also say this book was written, I think, in 2019. So when we're talking about language based on the usage of internet and how quickly things can change and evolve in our digital age, there were parts of it that were already seeming very outdated. So I think that maybe I would have enjoyed this book a little more if I read it closer to its original publication date and not having, 5 years pass. So there were things, like I said, that just did seem a little bit outdated, but that's going to be a problem with a lot of books related to technology or things like that, because we are so quickly evolving in those parts of our lives that things do lose their relevance very quickly in the digital age that we do live in. The other book that was a carryover from last week is James by Percival Everett. And at the time I filmed my last recap, I had just started to read this book, and immediately after I finished filming, I went and finished this book, and I absolutely devoured it. This book is a masterpiece. It lived up to every single one of my expectations. I will be doing a full-length review, I think, of this book. I think that it definitely deserves its own video for how much I loved it. And this was easily quickest 5 stars I think I've ever given to a book. And it's just further solidifying my love for Percival Everett. And he is quickly becoming, or if not already, my favorite author. I just adore him and the work that he is putting into the world. So more to come on James a little bit later on my channel. So there were also 2 books that I finished last week that were, at the time of my last recap, were not even on my radar. So you all know that I am a mood reader, and I try to repress myself sometimes, and sometimes I just say, you know what, nope, this is the time, this is when I'm going to read something. So sometimes my plans go completely out the window because I find other books that I want to make a priority. And the one was because I had a hold come in through my library for the audio for a book called Headshot by Rita Bullwinkel. And this is a book that has been on my radar for a while. I've heard over the last few months a lot of people talking about this. I also follow the Book Riot podcast, and they talk about this book pretty often. They refer to it, I think, at least once every few episodes. So it is a well-beloved book, and it's one that I was having FOMO over not having read it. So this book is a really interesting read, and it follows 8 teenage girl boxers. And the way that the book is set up is it's almost like a tournament style. So we follow 2 characters or 2 boxers at a time, and we learn about their lives and what is going on and what is driving them, what is fueling them, what their holdups and their hangups are, and why they're actually doing what they're doing with boxing, and why they are driven to put their bodies through that type of physical activity. And I found this book to be really intriguing. There were a lot of parts of it that just had me in awe of the writing. This is a debut, I believe, for Rita Bullwinkel, and the writing was just fantastic. I really appreciated her writing style for the most part. We'll get into that. But this book was ambitious, but it was super small. So for her to be able to have an ambitious book actually deliver in such a short amount of pages, I was truly impressed with this writer's ability. So definitely looking forward to more books from her in the future. But this book tackled grief and tragedy and parental expectations, familial rivalries. It tackled mental health, and it tackled beauty standards and physicality. And there were so many different things that this book tapped into, and it was really a fun read sometimes, but it was really hard to read at times. It had a chaotic energy to it. It was very pacey, and one thing that I have really been struggling with in my reading lately is that I haven't been a huge fan of the pacing in a lot of the books I've been reading, and this one was definitely on point for me. I loved it. I loved learning about each of the young women and their motivations and what was driving them to do what they were doing and to put their bodies in front of another and just fight it out. And it was such an interesting and compelling read for me. Now, the other cool part of this book is, like I said, it was tournament style. So we would get the first 2 boxers and then the next 2, and then we would revisit the winners of those previous matches in the next round until we ultimately got down to a winner. So with it being like that, there was a very fast pace to it, and the way that Rita Bullwinkel was able to write in tune or in beat with a boxing match was really impressive to me as well. And this leads to my one criticism of the book, and that is that she made a stylistic choice of using the full names of each of the boxers anytime that she addressed them. So for example, we had a character named Iggy Lane, and instead of calling her Iggy Lane once to introduce us to her, every time she referred to Iggy, it was Iggy Lane, Iggy Lane, Iggy Lane. Or it was Tanya Ma, Tanya Ma, Tanya Ma. And that, when we got to those really intense, fast-paced scenes, when you're kind of relating their thoughts to that frenetic pace of a boxing match, you got tripped up, or I got tripped up, and it slowed the pacing down for me actually. Instead of saying just Tanya did, or Tanya was, or Tanya is, it was Tanya Ma is, Tanya Ma did, Tanya Ma was. And it was just a little, it just snagged the pacing for me just a little bit. And I know there's probably a specific reason why she chose to do that. I haven't really dug into any other reviews or interviews with the author to find out maybe why she chose that, but I will say it did slow things down for me just a bit, but I don't think it was annoying enough for me to change my opinion of the book. I still think that this was an overall enjoyable read, and I would recommend it. The next book was another book that just kind of fell into my lap. The universe had spoken to me, and I decided that I needed to read it. So I have been wanting to read something by Hanif Abdurraqib for a while, and I just haven't really got around to it. I had a couple holds on books from my library, and I figured there were long waits for them, so whenever they came in, I would just, you know, prioritize them whenever that happened. And I was actually at my library, and I was talking to one of the staff there, and they were currently reading his book, There's Always This Year. It's his latest release, and she was telling me how much she was enjoying it, and I literally got that audio book in the same day. So that was my sign that I had to start it, and I am so glad that I did, because this was a gem of a read for me. So this book is a series of, like, I guess you could call them essays. They're a series of like personal stories, essays, and they all have a central theme woven into them surrounding basketball. Now, don't let that scare you if you are not a fan of basketball. I am not a basketball fan. Well, I shouldn't say I'm not a fan of basketball. I actually do enjoy watching basketball. I live in Pittsburgh, and we don't have a professional basketball team, so it's not really a sport that I'm exposed to very much, but I know enough about the sport, and I do enjoy watching it, especially around college basketball during the March Madness tourney season and things like that. But aside from that, I don't want anybody that isn't a fan of basketball to think that you cannot read this book and enjoy it. Basketball is the central interwoven theme, but it is not the point of the stories. And he will take your hand and he will guide you through each of those stories. And even if you don't know a lot about basketball, you are going to understand and relate to absolutely every point that he is trying to make throughout this book. He is a poet by trade, and that poet mentality and that poet grace that he has as a writer shines in this book. The language that he uses is just stunning. The comparisons that he makes, common points that he is trying to make, he does so in a way that will punch you in the gut at times. His writing is so raw, and it's so relatable, and it's so beautiful that you will just be in awe of what he has to say. My huge takeaways from this book were primarily on success and a life leading up to that point of success and victory, and what it truly means to make it or succeed in life, and all of the hurdles that you have to jump through, all of the setbacks, all of the things that stand in our way, and how we eventually can overcome those things and get to a point of reaching that triumph or reaching that victory. And he doesn't sugarcoat anything. This book is not a 100% positive book. He talks about all of the ugliness that happens along the way, and all of the disappointments, and how to recover from those disappointments and dust yourself off and keep going. And I just really appreciated that book, and it came at a time in my life where I needed a little bit of encouragement, and I was really hopeful by the end of this book. And if there's anything that you are going to get out of this book at the end of the day, it is that feeling of overwhelming hope, and that no matter what life throws at you, there is always something around the corner that is going to potentially make your life better, and all you have to do is keep going, and you're going to eventually come out on the other side of whatever it is you're going through in the moment. And it was such a beautiful book. I absolutely loved it. It was emotional. It was raw. I just loved this so much. I can't recommend it enough. Like I said, the writing was beautiful. And the other thing I loved about this, so we talked about like the main theme of it being tied to basketball, but he also spent so much time talking about music and film and other pieces of pop culture and art that we can all relate to. And I loved this, and I have a few other of his books on hold right now. I think I'm gonna wait for the audiobooks in hopes that he narrates those as well. He did narrate this audiobook, and he did an amazing job. I highly recommend this to anyone. So those were all the books that I finished. So let's move on to the books that I'm still actively reading. I'll go through carryovers very quickly, and then there are 2 new books that I'm actively reading that I did not talk about last week. So I am still reading A Trace of Sun by Pam Williams, 2 Sherpas by Sebastien Martinez Daniell, translated by Jennifer Croft, What I'd Rather Not Think About by Jente Posthuma, and Crooked Plow by Itamar Vieira Jr., translated from the Portuguese by Johnny Lorenz, and Mater 2-10 by Hwang Sok Young, translated from the Korean by Sora Kim Russell and Young J. Josephine Bay. So 3 of these were from the International Booker shortlist. Since I met with you last, they have announced the winner. It was in fact Kairos by Jenny Erpenbeck, translated by Michael Hoffman. I was so happy to see that book win. Although I am reading Crooked Plow, and it is absolutely blowing my mind. I am loving this book so much. Although I can definitely see why Kairos won over Crooked Plow, and I mentioned this in my predictions video, I just feel like Kairos is more accessible to more readers. Crooked Plow is just it's a person that loves magical realism's dream book. It is fantastic. I am loving it, and I think honestly this book, it's just not going to appeal to as many readers, but it is absolute catnip for a reader like me. And I definitely think that that's probably why a book like this didn't win over Kairos. Although personally, a book like this is always gonna win over Kairos for me any day. So more to come on this. I will definitely be doing a full-length review on all of the shortlisted or long-listed books from the International Booker that I still have yet to read. Lots to talk about still when it comes to the book prizes. Also, I am still slogging my way through Les Mis and the short stories of Clarice Lispector. Really no new updates. Things are still going great with both of those, and I will just continue to give brief updates on those unless something truly exciting happens that I feel the need to talk about. Now, the 2 new books that I am reading are, one is a hold that came in from my library in physical form. It's a short little book, and I thought, you know what the heck, I can fit it in between some of these other reads that I have, and that is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. This book follows the lives of 6 astronauts. Well, technically, I think it's 4 astronauts and 2 cosmonauts. 2 are from Russia, but they are on one of the final missions to a space station. And I'm not very far in. I think I'm only about 20% into the book, but so far, I am enjoying it. I know a lot of times when people think about reading books about set in space, that the focus of the book is going to be about what it is like to be in space. And I would say that this, to me so far, I feel like they have talked more about Earth than they have about space. So I'm really interested to see where this is going. And like I said, it follows the lives of the 6 people that are on the space station, so we're starting to learn about them as well and their interactions with each other. So it's a short book, so I think that it's going to be one of those ones that either has a whole lot to say in a very short amount of time, or it's one of those books that might make me end up wanting more at the end, or thinking that it was a book that was maybe a little ambitious and didn't end up delivering in the end. But of course, that's only speculation for me now. I will definitely have to finish this one, but I am enjoying it so far. And then the other one that I started is Matrescence, and that is a book by Lucy Jones. This was one of the ones that was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. And it's a book that I have not been able to get my hands on. So I was so excited when I received this finished copy from Pantheon. Thank you so much for providing me with this finished copy. I really appreciate it. And as soon as I got it, I immediately jumped into it. This is a book that follows basically what it is like to go through the entire process of motherhood. So we're talking about from conception throughout the duration of the pregnancy, and also the childbirth, and then to ultimately motherhood once the child's there and there to need care from its mother. So far I'm only about 40 pages in. We're still dealing with the pregnancy phase, and so far I am really enjoying this book. I was a little nervous going into it. I am not a mother. I have not experienced any of these things. So anytime we have a book that focuses specifically on something that I have not participated in or have lived through, I always get a little nervous that it's not going to hit home, or it's going to be a book that's just irrelevant to me. But I think that Lucy Jones is doing a great job of being inclusive to all readers, and we'll see where this one goes. I'm excited to get through this, and I definitely am enjoying her writing style. The stories that she is telling and the research that she is providing is really good as well. So I have high hopes for this one moving forward. And then the last thing that I want to talk about are a few books that I just had come in as holds through my library. So I am thinking that within the next week or so, I will probably get started. So you might get more of an update on these with my next recap. The first is Clear by Clarice Davies. This is a book that I have been dying to get my hands on. It is a short little novel, so I am hoping that it's one that I can pick up and maybe get through in one sitting. I have heard nothing but wonderful things about this book. So this book is set in Scotland, and it takes place during something called the Scottish clearances. I've also heard it referred to as the Highland clearances in learning about this, outside of the book. But apparently there was this time in Scottish history where I think it was like from maybe the mid 1700s through the mid 1800s, where there was a huge call for these impoverished families and people to be pushed off of their land so that that could be turned into farmland or be taken over. And this story follows a minister and his wife, I believe, and the minister is tasked with going to one of those remote pieces of land and pushing that homeowner out. And when he gets there to do so, there's an accident that happens, and I think that they end up developing a friendship, which obviously makes his job or task much more difficult. It sounds like an amazing story. It's set in the Scottish Highlands, which I absolutely love, and I am thinking that this is going to be a great read, and I cannot wait to get to it. And then the other books are The Curse of Pietro Houdini. I don't know why I picked this book up. I haven't really heard many people talking about it. I was intrigued by the cover. It looked to me like these were paintings. This was some type of artwork, and I've really enjoyed books as of late that have an art element to them. So I thought that this would be something that would interest me. Part of the story has to do, so this is set in August of 1943. So we all know what was going on in the world during August of 1943 with World War II. And this has to do with the smuggling of a couple paintings, maybe 3 paintings, but it sounds interesting. I will definitely give it a shot. I'm not sure, I've never heard of this author, and this book, I just so happened to, like I say, notice it on my library shelf. It caught my attention, and hopefully it turns out to be an interesting read. Now, the other 2 are ones I am super excited about. So we have Sociopath, a memoir by Patrick Gagna. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I'm gonna have to look that up, but this book sounds really fascinating. It is a memoir about a woman that was diagnosed as a sociopath, and she basically just talks about her struggling to come to terms with her own diagnosis and her to also try to educate the public on the disorder, because obviously a disorder like this is often misunderstood because we hear that term thrown around so often. I know that there are probably a lot of things in this book that are going to be educational, and I'm really looking forward to getting to that. And the last book that I have that just came in is one that I am really excited about. This was actually on my May anticipated releases list, and it is a follow-up to a book I read a few years ago. I also tend to read a lot of serious books where we have, you know, literary fiction, translated fiction, we have serious nonfiction, but every once in a while I really do like to read a lighthearted book and to kind of balance out all of the tragedy that's happening in a lot of the serious books that I'm reading. And this book, the original book, definitely fits the bill, and I'm sure that its follow-up will do the same, and that is The Guncle by Stephen Rowley. I absolutely loved The Guncle. It was such a pleasant surprise for me. I went into that book expecting complete fluff, and what I ended up getting was a poignant book that had me in all of my emotions, and it was funny, it was charming, it was beautiful, and I absolutely loved the characters in that book. So this is a continuation with the same characters. We're still following the Guncle and his niece and his nephew. They are traveling abroad for a wedding, and I am sure that this is going to have that same lighthearted fun, but there's still gonna be a moral to the story, and I'm sure that this is gonna have those emotional undertones that are just gonna get me in my feels again, and I think that this is gonna be a great read for the start of summer for me. So looking forward to getting to this one. So yeah, that has been my week in reading. I will say I have a lot of holds. I've been lurking on Libby. I have about probably 10 holds that are available soon, and I am just itching to get to some of them, so I really hope that it's true that they are available soon. I am really hoping within the next week or so to find some larger pockets of time to read a lot. I want to really get my list of current reads down some. I'm not used to having so many on my list at the moment because I am in the midst of a lot of books, especially for the women's prize as well as the international booker still. So I really would love to be able to take time to focus on those, to get those out of the way and get some other ones through rotation that I could maybe move through faster. For some reason, the books on the women's prize and the international booker, they've been taking me a lot longer than some of the other books that I have read. I don't know, maybe they're just more thought-provoking, maybe they're just more difficult or challenging reads, but I'm used to being a person that turns over books very quickly. So although I'm not in a rut, I kind of feel like I am because I'm talking about the same books from week to week to week, and that's not something that I typically do. I usually finish books within a day or so after I start reading them. Now granted, Les Mis and the Clarice Lispector short story collection, those are project books, so those are going to take me a while regardless, and that's my expectation. But some of the other reads that I've been hanging on to for a while, I really want to start to pick the pace up with those. So fingers crossed the next time that I meet with you for a recap, I will maybe have finished some of those books that I've been bringing up consistently over the past few recaps. So looking forward to being done with some of those. Not that they're not good, I just want to move on to some other things. And until we read again, bye.